Hey dudes and dudettes, it's me, E05, and this is another edition of The Radical Reset. Today I thought we would talk about Antipolitism's position on healthcare because depending on when you're watching this, you're either watching it during or after the COVID pandemic, and it calls into mind what we would do if we had an anti-politics government. You know, the big objection to anti-politism is going to be by the professional politicians, you're going to lose all of our experience and all of our know-how and all of the things we've learned to do, and we spend our lifetime dedicated to politics and public policy, and we have degrees in public policy, and we're lawyers and all this kind of bullshit, and only we know how to write laws. And, you know, we know how to do everything better. And, this from the people that brought us a 24 trillion climbing to $30 trillion deficit. Who only knows how high it really is. And then when you add in Social Security and Medicare. Anyway, but let's not digress into that today. Today's about healthcare. So anyway, fuck them and their experience. Let's talk about what people with common sense would do if we were in charge of healthcare. And since healthcare is something that affects each and every one of us, it is a very, very important issue, regardless of whether we're talking about it in the time of COVID or not. Now, let's all agree on one thing for sure. Healthcare is fucked up. It's been fucked up for a very long time. It gets increasingly fucked up, and the debate ranges. Now, right now, it's a debate between the progressive left, who would like to have, really, let's be honest, single-payer healthcare. You know, when they talk about free market alternatives, they talk about it in terms of transitioning ultimately to a national single-payer healthcare plan. And the Republicans, who represent the so-called conservative element in the country, who just want to do the exact same thing, only in a lighter fashion. In other words, continue with a mishmash of regulated functions, HMOs, PPOs, little experiments here and there to pay lip service to the free market, and basically continue with the government one way or another interfering in everything that has to do with healthcare. President Trump, not to be outdone, makes promises that he doesn't even understand why he's making them. Things like, we're going to make sure that pre-existing conditions are covered, but we're not going to require that everybody buys health insurance, which, if you understand how insurance works, is a guaranteed clusterfuck. Okay, so let's have a discussion on healthcare, and let's begin it. And, you know, we don't want to take forever, because in a podcast, I don't want this to be longer than 30 minutes, so I'm not going to get into the deep little details of it. If you want to read the deep details of it, by the way, and I do go into those and footnote them and source my research, it's all in A Radical Reset, the manifesto of anti-politism, that you can download for free if you're an Amazon Prime member, or you can buy the paperback. The link is here. And by the way, make sure you click on the subscribe button, and make sure you click on notifications, and make sure you click the link and get A Radical Reset, because again, I'm going to spend about 30 minutes here, and this is a much more detailed subject than 30 minutes can bear. I just want to give you an overview. So anyway, the clusterfuck that is our healthcare began in the mid-1960s with Medicare. Medicare is what fucked up medicine. Prior to the mid-1960s, there was no healthcare crisis in the United States of any kind. The market was free market. Healthcare was a business like any other. People went to their doctors, their surgeons, whatever it was. They bought insurance from any one of hundreds of insurance companies that were competing for their business at the time, and they chose either through their employers or personally to purchase what they needed. Now, let's begin with a very simple assumption. There are 340 million people in the United States, and a certain percentage of them are just plain stupid or irresponsible. So the idea that you're going to cover 100% of the population, even in a single payer plan, someone will find a way to fuck it up. So there's absolutely no way we're going to achieve perfection regardless of what the plan is, if you regard perfection as covering 100% of the population with insurance. It's unachievable because you cannot erase stupidity. There's no other way to put it, or irresponsibility. However, we could have a plan or a system, let's say. I don't like the term plan, because one plan for 50 states and 340 million people, that's absurd on its face. Just think about it. I mean, do the people in Boise, Idaho have the same needs as the people in Baltimore, Maryland? I mean, you know, do the people in Arkansas have the same needs as people in Atlanta? It's just absurd. Does Washington State have the same needs as Washington, D.C.? Is Wyoming exactly the same as Florida? I mean, The idea that you could have a one-size-fits-all for a population as diverse as ours, with as many different races and cultural identities and religious identities and creeds and points of view, and now there's more than two genders. My God, the idea that, by the way, there's only two genders. I'm teasing, but I'm just talking about in our popular culture. It's impossible to design a one-size-fits-all plan. Let's just start with that supposition. But anyway, back to Medicare. So there was one kink in the system prior to Medicare, and that was that as people get older, health insurance is like any other insurance. The premium is based on risk, and the older you get, the more health insurance you use, and the more health insurance you use, the more that it's going to cost to insure you, because the risk becomes greater to the insurance company. With health insurance, unlike your homeowner's insurance, which you could buy a $500,000 house and pay a premium of less than $1,000, because the risk of your house burning down is very, very, very small. When health insurance, the premiums are very high because the risk of you using it are 1 in 1. You are going to use health insurance. It's only a question of when. You might go a lifetime without your house burning down, but you're not going to go a lifetime without using health insurance. And as you get older and you get into my age group, you're going to use it more and more. And there were a lot of seniors in the mid-1960s that could not afford the premium on health insurance in those days when the market was just a free-for-all. And consequently, the government decided, when I say the government, first it was John Kennedy, and then later it was LBJ who really did it, Lyndon Baines Johnson, passed Medicare. The idea was to provide a health insurance plan for seniors who could not afford to buy their own. But like all government programs, it just metastasized like a cancer into something else altogether. Yada, 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 and the yada yadas are covered in a radical reset that you can pick up. And Medicare became the model for all health insurance of people of all ages, like all government programs do. And everyone in every state and every legislature and every governor and everyone jumped on the bandwagon because it was a very popular, was and is a very popular program. Consequently, in fact, today they're debating Medicare for all, and we can't afford the Medicare we have, let alone Medicare for all, but that's another digression. Let me just go with this here. And it became not just the model of what other insurance could be, it became the law of what other insurance had to be. Insurance had to resemble Medicare. Now, understand this was where the wheels came off the wagon. Because prior to Medicare, you and I, as the patient, were the customer. But Medicare changed that. Because Medicare changed the nature of insurance. Instead of it being what used to be called in the old days major medical, which meant there was a big deductible and most things you would pay out of your own pocket in those days. So if your kids needed their tonsils out, you'd go down to Dr. Jones, you'd say, how much is it going to cost to take the tonsils out? The doctor would tell you, including the hospital bill. If you didn't like that answer, you'd go to Dr. Smith or Dr. Jones or Dr. Cohen or Dr. Goldberg or Dr. whoever you wanted to go to. You'd get competing bids like any other business. The doctors were competing for your business like any other business. Hospitals were competing for your business like any other business, and that controlled costs. Because when the customer's in charge and the customer shops and the customer's paying out of their own pocket, they are going to demand a lower price for everything. But Medicare came along and changed that. And they changed it to the deductible 80-20 plan that so many of us grew familiar with and are still familiar with in many insurance plans across the country. In other words, Medicare has a $100 deductible. Once you have $100 out of your pocket, Medicare in the hospital pays 100% of everything out of the hospital. And there's Part A and Part B, and I'm conflating the two together just to keep this discussion simple, but this is how Medicare works to this day. After $100 deductible, everything in the hospital is covered. 80% of your doctor's office charges are covered of what's determined to be usual and customary, something that Medicare sets down. We'll get into that in just 1 minute. And then, you're left to pay the 20%. Then that's why they have Medicare supplementary insurance that pays that other 20% or anything over and above the usual and customary, as the case might be. Now, what this did is it changed the nature of incentives. Instead of worrying about what Dr. Smith was going to charge for a particular treatment, it became more like, how fast can we get past the $100? Now, $100 in 1965 is a lot different than $100 today. Here it is all these years later, 50 years later, we've never adjusted the deductible. It's still $100. But inflation has eroded the dollar. So at the very least, the Medicare deductible should have changed from $100 to today about $800. But of course, senior citizens, who are the most reliable voting bloc in the country for the Democrats or the Republicans, would have fucking shrieked their heads off, because once you hang out the free shit here sign, people think they're entitled to it, and therefore the deductible hasn't changed in 50 years. It's still $100. And that changes the nature of incentives. That means that you don't give a fuck what the bill is as long as you have your $100 and the 20% covered by your supplement. Who gives a fuck what the bill is? Now, the doctors who are having their charges restricted by this usual and customary list figured out how to get around that deal simply by adding on treatments that weren't necessary, or adding on things that were nice to have but you didn't need to have, but they would add them on because they could get more money out of Medicare. This, of course, perverted the free market and perverted incentives, and yada, yada, yada. We got to the fucking mess we're in today. All forms of insurance today that I'm aware of, with very few exceptions, cover everything after a small deductible or no deductible. In the case of HMOs, health maintenance organizations, or PPOs, you pay a small fee when you go to the office, and then if they refer you, there's no more fees from doctor to doctor to doctor. So how do they control costs? Well, rationing, which is why a lot of us fucking hate our healthcare. Because what it comes down to is, if you don't have market forces competing for your business to control costs, the only other way to control costs in a single payer or quasi-single payer system like an HMO, which is just a private version of single payer if you really think about it, is of course to ration care, to tell you what you can and cannot have, to make you wait for treatment, so on and so forth. So anyway, we're in this clusterfuck disaster caused by Medicare. All 50 states piled on, and then 50 states began mandating what had to be covered by every state's insurance companies. You know, in some states it got absurd to the point where they were covering toupees. I mean, and you think I'm kidding? I'm not. That was Washington State, by the way, and chiropractic care. And look, I'm not here to attack chiropractors. I'm just saying that everybody uses them. So why should they be forced to be covered? You know, you could buy, if insurance was a free market business, you could buy it a la carte. And if you wanted to buy chiropractic coverage, okay, great. But in most states, it's covered like anything else. Drug rehabilitation, alcoholism treatments, etc., etc. As each of these things are added in to what an insurance policy must cover, even for people who will never use these benefits, they're in fact paying for them, because there's not any other way to a la carte select what is or isn't covered. Anyway, healthcare is not a free market business. Now, let's add on to that the lawyers saw a chance to cash in. And, you know, lawyers are, as I've said many times before, paid intellectual prostitutes, and you need only turn on your television to see ads for lawyers trolling for various kinds of malpractice lawsuits, which force doctors to run tests and practice what's called defensive medicine. So while a lawyer will tell you that settlements in malpractice cases don't amount to that much money every year, that's one of those things where figures lie and liars figure, because the cost of them running tests that should have never been run in the first place for treatments that were completely unnecessary to protect themselves in the event of lawsuits are what really cost us all a fucking fortune. So that's a problem too. Then there's the issue of drug costs. Now, drugs, here's a real statistic, and I footnote where I got this statistic from in A Radical Reset, but you can believe me for now, or Google it up for yourself, or better yet, get the book for free, as I keep urging you to do. Out of 5,000 drugs that a drug company tests to go to market, one makes it. 1 in 5,000. That means they have 4,999 failures that have to be paid for in order to get that one drug. And that one drug could be the miracle drug that saves the life of your child. So do you really want to tell drug companies to change how they do business? But the problem is that the patents on drugs only last 20 years. Now that sounds like a long time, but when you are batting 1 in 5,000, you need to recover your costs very, very quickly on the drugs that you're developing in order to make a profit before they go generic and you lose control of your drug. Therefore, you got to make money up front. Therefore, you got to charge for it. And if the drug is one of those things that doesn't treat, you know, price is a reflection of demand, right? And scarcity. So if you develop a drug for a very rare illness, it's going to be very, very expensive, because in order for them to recover the cost of that 1 in 5,000 shot for that illness that doesn't affect that many people, they're going to have to recover that in the form of high treatment costs during that 20-year window. Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, it's one thing to develop a new kind of aspirin that everybody would take. I know there's no new kind of aspirin. Just follow the logic of this. if it's a drug that everybody's going to take, okay, that's going to be widely used by everybody, a painkiller, okay, that's a new safe painkiller, you can, if you're a drug company, charge less for it because everybody's going to be taking it. So during your 20-year window, you can recover your costs in that 1 in 5,000 shot more reasonably if everybody's taking it. But if you're developing the drug for a rare form of childhood cancer, okay, for some kind of myoblastoma that only a small fraction of children get, of course the treatment's going to be unbelievably expensive because the drug company has to recover its costs. And if you're saying, why should those motherfuckers recover their costs? Because, they take in billions and billions of dollars. Taking in billions doesn't mean you're profiting by billions. Profit and gross are two different things. If you don't understand that, take an economics course. But the thing is, what do they do with most of their profits? Reinvest them in new drugs, because as their patents are running out on the old drugs every 20 years, they got to continually supply the pipeline with new drugs and new treatments and new devices, depending on whether we're talking about a drug company or a medical device company or whatever it might be, in order to replace the old one. Otherwise, they'll be out of business, okay? And if they're out of business, if you're saying to yourself, well, fuck them, who cares if they go out of business? Well, then they won't be developing the drug to save your child if they get the rare myoblastoma. Do you understand? Politicians make cheap hay out of attacking drug companies because it's not that they don't understand the drug business, it's that they're too fucking venal, to explain it to you in a way that you would understand. But the bottom line is 1 in 5,000 must recover the costs. The rarer the disease they're treating, the more it's going to cost. It's as simple as that. It is no more complicated than that. Okay, and whether it's a drug or it's a delivery device like an EpiPen, okay, it's the cost has to be recovered because after 20 years, that's it. It goes generic and they make it in India and that's the end of that. And your profitability is down the drain. Look at the cost of Viagra today. Now there are companies, forhims.com and all the rest of those things or whatever I don't know, Ramses.com. I forget I don't take it. I got to be honest. I know you don't believe me, but I don't take it because I don't date. That's what it really comes down to. But anyway, having said that, it's not that I wouldn't take it. The cost of Viagra has gone from a couple of $100 a pill to $5 a pill because it's gone generic. The 20-year patent is out. That's it. Profitability for Pfizer. I think it was Pfizer who made Viagra. Maybe it was Merck. But anyway, that's it. Party's over. They've made all the money they're going to make on it, and now it's going to be taken over and has been taken over by generic manufacturers. When you get those little pills in the mail from those forhims.com and the rest, those are not brand name pills. Those are generic pills that are being provided by generic producers, most of them out of the country. And there you go. There you have it. There you are. So anyway, here's the problems we have to solve. We have to solve how do we get insurance to be affordable. We have to solve how do we cover as many people as humanly possible. We have to solve how do we avoid rationing, because what you don't want, I live in Arizona, and down here in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, there are thousands, I'm not exaggerating, thousands of Canadian nationals who live down here part of the year to take health care at the Mayo Clinic in particular and Scottsdale and pay out of their pocket because in Canada, this wonderful single-payer system that Bernie Sanders can't shut the fuck up about, the waiting list for a new hip, for example, is over 2 years. Okay, and that's just one example. I dated a girl, her name is Dominique, I won't use her last name because she's alive and well, and she had a form of rheumatoid arthritis, this is years ago, that affects young women called ankylosing spondylitis. The treatment for ankylosing spondylitis is Enbrel, the stuff that Phil Mickelson advertises on TV. But Enbrel was in those days very, very expensive. And so the Canadian healthcare system simply didn't provide it. There was no waiting list for it. It was simply unavailable. All they would give her is Vioxx in those days, an anti-inflammatory. Well, if you don't treat ankylosing spondylitis by the time you're 30 years old, you're going to go blind. Now, the happy news is that she was a talented book editor, came down and emigrated to the United States, got a job in New York City, got private health insurance in New York City, got Enbrel, and she's alive and well today as far as I know. We do not keep in contact, but I do check in every now and then on Facebook to see how she's doing, and she's doing great now. And she is no longer a 30-year-old kid. Don't judge me. So, having said all those things, the point of the matter is, we don't want a rationing system. We don't want a system where people have to go live in another country to get the care that they really want. Canada sounds great until you live with it, and countries like Great Britain and Sweden and other countries where that the socialists tout as single payer, this is the way to go, all have two-tiered systems. In other words, the poor get one kind of care and the rich get something else completely different. They have pay for as you go plans, even in Great Britain, where you can go to private doctors and private hospitals that are not part of the national health care system. And you know what? They're much, much better. And when anyone still to this day gets really, really sick anywhere in the world, they fly them to the United States because, say what you want, again, figures lie and liars figure, and you can use numbers to support anything you want. But in the end, look at where the wealthy go when they get sick, and they come here. They go to Johns Hopkins, they go to Cedars-Sinai, they go to the Mayo Clinic, they go to Mass General, they go to anywhere but their own fucking country, right? Because the care is still better. So how do we make this available to the most Americans humanly possible, except the stupid that we're never going to be able to help? And how do we do this and keep costs down, because it's been accelerating faster than the rate of inflation for years and years and years? And how do we make sure that everybody gets the coverage that they need, including old people like me, whose insurance would be too expensive? And how do we cover the working poor? Okay? In other words, people that work hard, but for whatever reason don't make enough money to afford their own insurance and don't work for companies big enough that they can get group insurance through their company. How do we accomplish all of this? And I have two words for you: free market. We haven't had a free market in healthcare for years and years. So I'm going to give you a point by point. I'm going to kind of rush through it because, again, I'm only trying to spend about 30 minutes total on this. But again, I spell this out in great detail and why and how it will work in A Radical Reset, the link again below this video. Okay, number one. And this is in no particular order. Number one, we need to repeal all federal and state regulations as it regards health insurance. Get rid of the regulations. Allow innovation in the insurance market. You know, insurance is a business like any other, and it's based on actuarial risk. In other words, what is the probability of a claim versus how much they have to charge to cover those claims by their customers and then make a fair profit for themselves. And profit here is not a dirty word. Without profit, there is no incentive to control cost. Profit is the incentive to control cost, because you're competing with other companies and you need to make a profit against them. And so you have to trim yourself as much as possible and be efficient as much as possible to increase your profit without increasing your price, because if you increase your price, you will lose market share to your competitor unless you have something premium. Not everybody buys everything on price. In other words, we want to have a broad smorgasbord of choices, okay? Instead of one choice, you know, some states under Obamacare had one insurance choice. We want to have hundreds and hundreds of choices and let you pick from all of them. And how you do that is to deregulate the market. Allow insurance companies to find their niche. And there will be niche insurance companies that cover certain things. You know, one of my favorite insurance companies today that still exists, amazingly enough, is a company called Golden Rule. By the way, I have no relationship with Golden Rule. But they provide, one of the things that they provide is, for example, gap health insurance coverage between jobs. And this is their little niche, and they do it really, really, really well. Okay, my daughter used it between job, you know, when she left the job to do another one, and the cost of COBRA, you know, to do it through the government kind of thing was fucking ridiculous. And so she bought a temporary policy with Golden Rule, and it didn't cover pre-existing conditions, but she was 21 years old and didn't have any pre-existing conditions. That's what I mean by a niche. It's just a little niche that they serve extremely well. We paid a premium. It was a reasonable premium. It was a very low risk that she would have a health insurance claim during that period of time she was covered. It was for about 6 months. So the premium was very, very low, but we felt very well covered. They're an A+ insurance company. They do a great job. Okay, they have a great reputation. That's just one example. They're also big in the health savings account business, I think. Again, I don't have a relationship with Golden Rule, but they're a terrific company. Well, there should be 1 million Golden Rules. There should be thousands of Golden Rule companies in the country that we can pick from, and they should be able to compete interstate. Now the law is that insurance companies can't cross state lines to compete in another state. Why? What fucking insanity? Who came up with that bullshit? There should be no regulation on this whatsoever. Insurance companies should be able to design plans to fit any typical niche of people as they want to buy it. So a lot of people, in order to save premium, for example, will buy high deductible plans and will pay for shit out of their own pocket, which is great because that makes them a customer. And see, right now today, if you don't have a plan where you are the customer, you're just this thing called the patient, and the insurance company becomes the customer. The HMO or the PPO is the customer and the provider, what the fuck is that? What incentive is there to provide? That's why sometimes you must feel like a piece of meat as you're treated, and they don't know your name in the office at the doctor's office unless you go constantly, and they don't even understand that you're the customer, because you're not. You're not the customer, okay? The insurance company is. And if the government became the single provider, they would become the customer. You want to be the customer. And the higher the deductible on an insurance plan, the more you are the customer, because the more you are being made a part of the process. And start asking, what does this cost? Start reading the fucking bill. Start understanding what a treatment costs, and doing what we do when we consume anything else, whether we're buying a car or groceries. We all ask, what does it cost? And we weigh cost versus benefit. Why should health insurance be any different? If we remove the regulations and we allow insurance companies to compete across state lines, and we allow them to customize the plans, you'll be able to pick things. Oops, that was me knocking the stand because I was uncrossing my legs. As I've said many times, this is not ABC News. But anyway, you get my point. Okay, I don't have to kill that one anymore. So remove the regulations, allow insurance companies to compete. Now that brings up the issue, what do we do about people with pre-existing conditions? Again, niche insurers will have niche insurance, niche being N-I-C-H-E, if you can't understand my pronunciation, that will be specializing in pre-existing conditions. Now, pre-existing conditions, you can pass a law that says that if you move from company A to company B with group insurance, and it's a big group, you're working for a big employer, okay, and so the risk can be spread over a lot of people, it's reasonable to require that pre-existing conditions be covered. And that is how it's covered today, by the way, and why 90% of people don't have an issue with pre-existing condition issues. Pre-existing condition issues only apply to a small group of people. Politicians never say this, but it only applies to a small group of individuals who are buying individual insurance, not group insurance, through their employer, and then switch from one to another. And how do they get covered if they switch from one to another? Well, the easy answer here is not an easy answer. Now, if they're wealthy, they simply pay for it. You know, they just pay more for their insurance. Just like, for example, a cigarette smoker pays more for life insurance than a non-smoker does because of the risk of death and how many years the insurance company will be collecting premiums before that person dies, and they ultimately have to pay off the death benefit. The same thing is going to be true in health insurance. You know, people, and let's talk like adults. There are congenital conditions that cause pre-existing conditions, and there are lifestyle conditions that cause pre-existing conditions. In other words, if you have diabetes and you're my age, there's a very high likelihood that you're fat. And the reason that you're fat, and I mean, okay, you know, shapely, Rubenesque, but the fact of the matter is you're a fatty, right? I mean, you're eating too much, and you've gained too much weight. And there's two kinds of diabetes. There's childhood diabetes and there's adult onset diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 2 diabetics, adult onset diabetes, overwhelmingly are fat. That means that they have made lifestyle choices that have led them to be diabetics as adults, which also means that they need to pay for it out of their own pocket. You know, you pays your money, you takes your chances. Now, children diabetics is a different story. Okay, people who are childhood diabetics and then, of course, live into adulthood as diabetics and treat themselves their whole life. Like, for example, Mary Tyler Moore. Mary Tyler Moore was a lifetime diabetic, God rest her soul. She was not to blame. This was a congenital condition, but I'm using diabetes because it can be either way, right? Now, those people, when she goes to change insurance, there has to be an allowance for that. What do we do for people who cannot afford it but have congenital conditions that has nothing to do with their lifestyle choices, that they have to be? Well, there's a couple things we can do. For the wealthy, we do nothing at all. Wealthy can afford to just pay the extra premium for the coverage for niche coverers. For the poor, we voucher it. It's a really simple and elegant solution. There aren't that many of them, okay, comparatively speaking, out of 340 million people. We provide vouchers to supplement the insurance premium to the poor, based on a sliding income scale, so that they can pick up pre-existing condition coverages with insurance companies that will spring out of all over the place to provide those kind of coverages as a niche insurer. There are niche insurers for everything. Just like there's the general for car insurance for people that have shitty driving records, there will be special companies that in a free market that provide coverage, excellent coverage for pre-existing conditions, and we'll work out a voucher system, and we can do it state to state because every state's poor is different. The poor people in Wyoming are poor for a different reason than the poor people in Los Angeles. It's as simple as that. I mean, I realize this gets rid of the huge government bureaucracy, but it's simple and it's elegant. Provide a voucher. There just aren't that many of them. It'll be so much cheaper to basically cut a check on their behalf to the insurance company to pay for the extra cost of insurance than it is to create an entire government bureaucracy and force everybody to be covered in the same fucking system and create this Medicare monstrosity that we have today. The same thing goes for old people. Let's get rid of fucking Medicare. Medicare is going to kill us financially. Medicare is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It is. Just forget the 28, you know, the 24, 28. I don't even know what the number is at this point because of all this stimulus we're doing during COVID, but the nearly climbing to $30 trillion deficit doesn't include the unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Social Security. And those two things alone are going to kill us. Kill us. We can shut down the whole fucking government and they're going to kill us. We got to get out of it. How do we get out of it? We let the wealthy pay for their own insurance. We let the middle class pay for part of their insurance and voucher some of it. And for the poor people, we voucher all of it. But even for the people that we voucher all of it for, even for the truly poor people, that we, and when I say we, I mean state governments, not the federal government. Under an anti-political system, the federal income tax is going to go away. That's another subject for another day, but there will be no federal income tax. That means there's going to be a lot of room, and the federal government will have money to do what it needs to do, and I'll explain that in another video. Or you can read it right now in a Radical Reset. But the point of the matter is, every state can therefore raise taxes as it needs to provide for the population of that state. And the reason I would prefer to see state governments do it instead of the federal government is that their bureaucracies are much, much smaller. And since they're much, much smaller, they're much, much closer to the people. And since they're much, much closer to the people, they're much more responsive. In other words, you might live next door to your state senator. You know, they're not some far-off god living in Washington, D.C. and pontificating from on high. The governor lives in your neighborhood in most states, right? So here's the thing. Because of that, it's a much more responsive bureaucracy. Now, today what restricts state governments from being able to do the things I'm talking about is that the federal tax burden is so high that the states don't have enough room. What happens is that you get a state like California, for example, that's a very wealthy state, and most of its money gets siphoned off to Washington, then Washington siphons it back. Well, think of how much money is lost in the waste and bureaucracy of government as it gets cycled around and comes back to California. What if we just left it there? What if we just left California with all of its enormous resources and all of its dynamic population and all of its tax base in California and let the governor of California and the legislature of California, and if they do a fucked up job, the people can recall them. They've done it before. That's how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor. I'm not here to make a commentary on California politics. And I'm not here to comment on whether they're left or right. Remember, in an anti-political system, there are no political parties. Antipolitism is a system of pragmatism. Let's do what works. Yes, there's going to have to be vouchers to take care of the poor. Yes, we're going to have to make sure that they're covered. We don't want them dying in the street. But we do that at the state and local level. And the other thing that does is it creates 50 laboratories of innovation. And they can experiment with what works best with private insurers and coordinate together. But even at the poorest level, the poor must be made to pay something. Why? Two reasons. The number one reason is the reason an able-bodied person is poor is because they've made vile fucking decisions, and there has to be a consequence to those decisions. And you've got to make them pay money out of pocket, even if they're poor. Otherwise, they become chronic overusers and dependents and entitled. In other words, just go to the emergency room today and see how many people are being treated for free and aren't being made to pay anything, and that's wrong. You've got to even make the poor pay something so the poor doesn't overuse health insurance and create higher costs for us all, because those all get shifted on to everybody else to pay the bill when they walk away and don't pay it at all. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, we can protect everybody. We can provide a voucher system. And again, I'd leave it to, I'm not defining what that is because states will experiment. And the population of Wyoming, I always use Wyoming because I think there's more cattle than people in Wyoming. Wyoming's going to have a very different system and structure than California will. And people will emigrate state to state based on, how they want to live. They do it today. Right now, California is losing population because of the way they're running things in that state. And Texas is gaining population because of the way they run things in that state. And that might change. Let states compete for population. What's wrong with that? And let governments compete for population. And let governments compete for tax base. And some states might say, fuck it, we don't want those people, and keep it very spare. Again, remember, the United States is like 50 little foreign countries with open borders. We're all different state to state. Allow states to innovate. Okay, so we've gotten rid of Medicare and Medicaid. We've switched it and we've gotten rid of all regulations on insurance. We're allowing insurance companies to compete state to state. We're allowing state governments to voucher based on pre-existing conditions and age. Older people get vouchers to offset the cost of their insurance, but still buying private insurance, which is going to be so much better than any government alternative. Let's be honest. Okay, so what do we do about high cost of treatment besides? So we've returned in this scenario the patient to being the customer, but we still have some problems. We got to solve the lawsuit problem. We have got to solve the lawsuit problem. How do we solve the lawsuit problem? 2 words: loser pays. Every industrialized nation in the world, and this is for more than just insurance, this is for everything. Every industrialized nation in the world, except the United States, has loser pays. Loser pays means if you bring a lawsuit and you lose, you pay the legal costs of the guy you sued or the company you sued. And that gets rid of all the frivolous bullshit lawsuits. Of course, that's going to put all those guys on TV out of business that are trolling for lawsuits all the time. The companies settle because it's cheaper to settle them than to go to court. But those should be gone, my friends. Fuck those guys. Fuck those trial lawyers. Fuck those scavengers preying on illegitimate booty that they gain. Look, life has risks. Some shitty things happen sometimes. Not everything is attributable to a lawsuit. And a doctor, you can walk into a doctor's office and the doctor can look at you, a doctor's been practicing for a period of time, and say, hey, look, you got the flu. All right, great. Drink plenty of fluids. Here's some Tamiflu. Go home. Take it easy. Today, they got to run 16 tests to make sure that you've got the flu and not COVID-19, because God forbid you have COVID-19, which, by the way, probably would be no worse for you than the flu. They might get their ass suit off. So they've got to protect themselves and prove in court. And that's where the unnecessary costs come in. Loser pays. It also drops the cost of malpractice insurance, which means that certain specialties, like, for example, gynecology, obstetrics and gynecology, which now have a shortage because not enough doctors practice it because the cost of malpractice is so incredibly high, now become cheap because of loser pays. So, loser pays. Every single industrialized nation in the world has it. It's time for us to join the party. That's why fucking lawyers who make up 60% of our federal government need to, that's just ridiculous. Blood-sucking scavengers are 60% of our government, and naturally they've skewed the laws so that they can make money when they're, for their friends or for themselves when they're in private life. Okay, now, so we've solved that problem. Next, let's come to the drugs. What are we going to do about the high cost of drugs and treatments? Easy. We treat drugs the way we treat music royalties. In other words, instead of a 20-year patent on a drug, when a company develops a new drug, the law changes to say they have eternal rights to royalties on it. In other words, they can put it out to generic manufacturer right away and they get a piece of everything forever. In other words, I'll use an anecdote. I knew a guy firsthand who used to be the drummer for the Animals. Okay, remember the Animals, Eric Burdon and the Animals? That there is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun? Okay. Well, back in those days, the members of that music group, the Animals, were a bunch of heroin addicts, okay? And the one guy that had the brains about him to put his name on the House of the Rising Sun, that particular song, was the drummer. And the rest of them, Eric Burdon and the rest, were all too drugged out to do it. But he put his name on it as the writer of the song. And today, fast forward, I don't know if he's still alive, but he was alive 10 years ago. As of 10 years ago, he was living on those royalties. I mean, 10 years ago was only 2010, and that song came out in the 1960s. And he was making about $500,000 a year and living in Studio City, California, in a beautiful home, in a beautiful area off Coldwater Canyon, if those of you are familiar with LA, and living a wonderful lifestyle, all on the proceeds of the royalties from the House of the Rising Sun, which meant every time any radio station in the world plays House of the Rising Sun, he gets a little teeny royalty from each of those plays, which really add up at the end of the year. Well, if that was true of drugs, if Pfizer developed Viagra and could have put it out was going to get a royalty forever. In other words, instead of having to amortize, that means recover, the cost of developing Viagra in 20 years, they can recover it forever. It becomes a cash cow for as long as people need help to get a hard-on, which is going to last forever. Men are going to always need help to get it hard, folks. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but that's the truth because, it's just the world we live in. So consequently, yeah, I know you don't use it, but your friend next door does, so just trust me. So anyway, to make a long story short, imagine how cheap it would have become. It would have become as cheap as it is today, a $5 pill instead of a $300 pill like it used to be. And bingo. Perpetual royalties on everything. You develop a treatment, you're entitled to a royalty from everybody that manufactures it worldwide forever. Bingo, the drug issue is solved. Just as simple as that. No government regulation. You don't want the government negotiating drug prices. That means they're going to force them down, which is going to mean less innovation, which is going to mean less treatments for rarer illnesses like, God forbid, childhood myeloblastomas. That's brain tumors, by the way. That kills, not millions of children, but thousands. And if your child is one of those thousands, you thank God that the drug companies have treatments for it. And the only way they're going to be able to recover those costs is through lifetime royalties. Forever, as long as the treatment is used, they're entitled to the royalty, and that solves the problem altogether. Along with, by the way, getting rid of the fucking FDA, which makes instead of having it being 1 in 5,000, frankly, folks, every treatment should be available to you all the time. And you, as long as you understand what the risks are, you should be able to make that decision to use it or not use it. And that's part of the picture too. Okay, so we've solved the lawsuit issue, we've solved the drug issue, we've solved the insurance issue, we've solved the poor people issue, we've solved the pre-existing condition issue. What else is there? That's it. So basically, the bottom line is we have solved the health insurance issue by less government, not more. Instead of a new See, that's what government does. It creates the fucking problem with Medicare, and then it adds layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. Oh, one more fix. One more fix that has nothing to do with the government. Well, it does and it doesn't. Licensing is insane, okay? Licensing for any career or profession is insane. Licensing does not guarantee, don't worry, I'm not changing the subject, bear with me on this. Licensing, think about this. Does licensing guarantee that when you go to a licensed professional anything, that you're getting a good result? Nah, it just means they're licensed. All licensing really is a way to prevent competition in the market. So, if you wanted to go to medical school today to become a physician yourself, unless you're a straight A student, okay, and when I say straight A, I mean straight A student, it's very, very, very difficult to get into medical school. But the straight A's really mean you're going to be a good doctor? And if you can live through the torment of medical school, which is a very limited supply, does that mean you're going to be a very good doctor? Nope. Do you pick your doctors based on any of that shit? Or do you pick on who makes you comfortable and who you feel comfortable with as you're treated? Basically, we've got to increase the supply of doctors and medical professionals like physician's assistants and things like that. How we do that is eliminate licensing, okay? And open it up and build more medical schools. We need more doctors. And you know what? A B student can be just as good a doctor as an A student. That is bullshit. That is a cultural bias. You know, I'm all about merit and I'm all about achievement, but I'm also all about not having barriers to entry to competition for professionals. And in every business, the people who love licensing the most are the people that are in the profession because it prevents competition. And if you prevent competition, you increase prices. So the last piece of the puzzle is we've got to get rid of the licensing of physicians and say, as long as you go to medical school, you can hang out a shingle and call yourself doctor. Being able to pass a test does not guarantee. There are plenty of pill-pushing, no good motherfucking doctors who, you know, can pass the exams and get licensed. And there are plenty of very, very competent physicians who aren't particularly great test takers and who went to foreign medical schools to get into medical school and went to... One of my dearest friends had to go to medical school in Belgium. Why did he go to medical school in Belgium? Because when he was in college, he was fucking around and smoking a little dope. Now, by the way, he's retired now. He became a rheumatologist. He was a terrific physician. Everyone loved him. But, you know, in college, he was fucking around. So in order to go, but a lot of people don't have the option of having families who can pay their way to Belgium. Think about that. He had to go to Belgium and learn Flemish, which is a version of Dutch. Okay, and he had to go to medical school in Dutch, come back to the United States, get licensed. It just restricts, you get it. We're restricting the supply of physicians. Look, if you want to be a doctor, if that is your passion in life, if you're an above average student and you have a brain in your head and you have the passion to help people, you should be able to become a doctor. And if that means doctors don't make $300,000 and $400,000 a year, then they don't. You know, the good ones will and the bad ones won't. There's, in any profession, you know, great plumbers make huge incomes and shitty plumbers make shitty incomes, you know? And great doctors should make great incomes and shitty doctors should make shitty incomes. And in the age of the internet, we all can find out right away, there's no reason that doctors shouldn't be yelped like anything else. And you should be able to look up and find out what their outcomes are like anything else. And believe me, in a free market, that's what happens. We've got to get government out of the fucking way. So, let me recap everything and then let's wrap it up. Repeal all regulation, repeal all restriction to interstate commerce, vouchers to the poor and to the elderly so they can buy insurance for whoever they want based on their income and their assets, by the way. Old people tend to have a lot of assets and they hide their income, but assets can be liquidated, so we have to count assets too. Get rid of, just get the government the fuck out of the way. Loser pays, licensing and royalties on drugs forever and ever, and stop the restriction on the supply of physicians through the faulty system of licensing, and get the American Medical Association out of the way of restricting the supply of doctors. If you increase the supply, you reduce the cost. It's as simple as that. Okay, I've solved it all, and I've done it without a government bureaucracy, and I've saved trillions of dollars a year, and I've saved the bankruptcy of the U.S. government, and I dare you to tell me anything that could possibly work better. You know, we've got to learn to trust ourselves, my friends. We've got to stop looking to the king to solve every fucking problem. And we've got to stop looking to government who in the case of healthcare, created the problem in the first place. Okay, so pick up a copy of A Radical Reset. Everything I've said here, and I know I've talked fast because it's such a big subject, but pick up A Radical Reset. I go through it in detail. You can go through it slowly. You can review it. You can check my footnotes. You can check my sourcing material. You can see if you think I'm full of shit or right up or hitting this right down the middle of the alley, which I am, by the way. And that's that. Click on the subscribe button. Click on the notification button. I hope that your life is healthy and happy. I hope you never need to have serious insurance. I hope you live your entire life and die in your sleep when you're 120 years old. But in case you don't, keep in mind what I've shared with you today. And for now, this is E.H. Ivins, signing off.